I'm Scott Beaulier, host of EconVersations and director of the Johnson Center for Political Economy here at Troy University. Tonight's show is going to be about immigration, in particular the Alabama immigration bill and the effects that it has had since its passage earlier this fall. Joining me tonight on the show are Dr. Daniel Smith, an assistant professor here at Troy University in the Johnson Center for Political Economy, and Darrick Luke, an MBA student in the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University, who's a farmer who's been affected firsthand by the immigration bill's passage. I should disclose that I, as the director of the center and a huge proponent of economic freedom, am strongly in favor of immigration. Open borders and the free movement of people have been shown to be important, perhaps some of the most important contributors to economic growth and prosperity. If you think back about American history, they were crucial in driving the economic growth early in the 20th century and all the way up until the First World War, when we tightened borders, the Great Depression, and World War II. After World War II, we had a more open policy once again, and growth returned in the United States. So there's a lot of empirical support for immigration. And I'm a strong defender of it. However, on tonight's show, I'm going to try to present the critical arguments to our guests and see if they can defend open immigration, see how they would respond to some of the hardest questions that are thrown at them. So guys, thanks for being here tonight. I really appreciate you coming on the show over the holidays here and being my guest. Darrick, I want to start with you. How's farming these days?
That's good.
What kind of farming do you do?
Harvest season's about done with. We plant corn, cotton, peanuts, and tomatoes. Mm-hmm. That's about what we do. Okay. And can you comment at all on the before and after, if you saw any effects from the immigration bill? Right before the immigration bill got into office, we had a few workers that worked for us that got a little shaken about it. And then once it passed, it was less than a week. They were all gone. They went back to Mexico.
And you were stuck having to find replacement labor?
We had the fields stayed. I mean, none of the produce got picked. I had a hard time finding people to work for us, even the locals. I was throwing money at them, and I still couldn't get them to work. So we suffered in the long run, but we're still pulling through.
Dr. Smith, this is something, I'm just going to call you Dan, this is something that economists would have predicted, I suppose. Mm-hmm. You're a big defender of free trade, the idea that goods and services should be able to flow across borders. Mm-hmm. It seems like immigration's somewhat of an extension of that argument. About what you expected. Of course, he was going to have difficulty finding workers.
Yeah, absolutely. The case for free immigration is an extension of the case for free trade. Whether you're trading oranges or you're trading labor, when you prevent the mutually beneficial exchanges from occurring, people are going to be hurt.
Mm-hmm. Let me just put on the hat of a typical Alabama citizen and present some arguments to you of why we needed to do this. One of the big ones, it was presented by Scott Beeson, a representative who was behind the bill, was that this was going to create jobs. It was going to really help Alabama at a time where our unemployment rates in the state are above national averages. People are running out of unemployment insurance, and they need to find jobs, or they're just going to be cut off of any kind of welfare program. Dependence on Medicaid and other poverty alleviation programs is rising. This was going to help them because what it was going to do was perhaps displace some people who didn't belong here, and then the people who could fill in these jobs were just Alabamians who really needed them. How would you reply to that? It seems like a pretty good idea.
Well, if you look throughout history of the U.S., since 1950, the workforce in America has increased from 60 million to 150 million. And you'd expect, if this argument was true, that when people join the workforce, that there's drastic increases in unemployment. You'd expect to see stark increases in unemployment during this time, but you don't. And the reason you don't is that the more people you have working, the larger your workforce, the more people that come to the U.S., the more opportunities there are to create businesses and start up new avenues, create restaurants, new lines, and more products. The fact is that the number of jobs is unlimited because we have unlimited wants. The more people that come and take low-skilled jobs, like let's say construction workers, the more that a construction crew can lower their cost by hiring low-skilled immigrants, the more businesses in Alabama can afford to open up another business or extend their current business. Or a doctor's office, if they can afford to hire low-skilled immigrants to do their janitorial work as well as their lawn care, well then maybe they can afford to hire another nurse or maybe even another physician. So actually the immigrants actually complement the native workforce and actually create more jobs when you look at it on net. And no matter how you cut it, economists have found that it's a net benefit for native workers. It increases wages and the number of jobs in the U.S. by allowing free immigration.
So it essentially creates a little bit of surplus or cushion in a firm to then either save the money and report a higher profit or pour more money back into the business in terms of greater employment. You have the first-hand experience of the effect on jobs. You said you were throwing money at workers and you couldn't get them to come out and help you pick tomatoes.
Yeah,
and
the local guys wouldn't come.
Yeah.
I mean, the jobs were there. I mean, we offered them. I mean, it wasn't like a secret. We just couldn't get them to come out and work.
Yeah.
If they did come out, they only worked half a day and said, no more. I mean,
why no more?
You're in the field all day long in July and June and July's heat in Alabama is 100, 101, index 110. I mean, that's hard work. And the money's there. You just have to do the work to get the money.
Yeah. You're in a network where you know a lot of other farmers around Alabama. Is your experience unique? Were some of them hiring on Alabamians after we displaced immigrants from the state, or was their experience much like yours?
Much like mine.
Yeah.
We try to get local guys. We even try to hire. But, I mean, once you start hiring out contracts, now you're in a contract. I mean, it costs more in the long run, then it's worth it. So you gotta look at the plus and the negatives about it. So yeah, a lot of them are the same way. Definitely with the up north Alabama, they got hit real hard. So,
Darrick, how would you respond to the argument that employment of illegal immigrants is just unfair to them? They're being paid really low wages, and you know what? It's really tough. You're kind of exploiting them to some extent.
I say that's just a negative outlook on it. To me, I think I give them a benefit of the doubt. I give them a job. They can take it and do what they want to do with it. They can make it into a positive thing, and they can support their families with it. And also they can, if they are illegal, we try not to hire illegals, but if they are, most of them are in the process of trying to get a green card. So it helps pay the bills and help them get into build credit and everything else.
You've mentioned to me in private that you were able to set up working arrangements where they worked by the box or something too, right? Like if you picked a certain amount of tomatoes, then you got paid piecemeal rates, which led to greater productivity. Can you do that after the immigration bill? Is that much more difficult to do with your workers? Piecemeal.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got a young gentleman that's international here, and you tell him you pay him $5 a box, and man, he'll get out there and pick all day long. I mean, he'll get a truck full of 200 something boxes. I mean, you take 200 and times it by 5, and you can do the math.
Yeah.
Now you go downtown, get a local man, $5 box. I mean, he'll look at you like you're crazy. I mean, he's just not going to do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, okay, you're not going to do that. I pay you $15 an hour. That was my highest wage. He lasted 3 hours in the field, and that's all. I mean, it was a wrong size tomatoes. They weren't ripe. But I mean, if I kept my workers, I had the right size tomato, the right color, the right texture to go onto the market, and that's all it comes down to.
Yeah.
And if we have a boom at the market or an increase in price, I usually share it with the workers. We don't hold back from them.
Yeah.
I mean, we know what they go through. We know what they have to do to pay the bills. I mean, we try to help them as much as possible.
Dan, let me get to turn back to you and just get to some of the other arguments you often hear against immigration. One of them that I encounter again and again is that, well, yes, immigrants provide a valuable service in the fields, or yes, they provide valuable services when it comes to the labor they provide to the construction industry, but it comes at a real cost when they're under the radar because they're not contributing anything in the way of taxes. They're having a lot more kids than just a typical person, and all of those kids draw on the system their entire lives. They're using our roads and our schools and our health services, and these things make them tremendously costly. So we have to keep them out because on net, they're actually negative value added to our economy. You and I and other people who are working in the formal market are paying for all of these people who are just getting a free ride. Is there evidence on this or an argument that you would present back to counter that?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I found that argument very peculiar because the vast majority of the enforcement mechanisms for these immigration laws is actually to prevent immigrants from working. So while the argument is that they're going to come here and live off the system, our enforcement mechanism is to prevent them from working. But yet, even despite those incentives to get them not to work because of the law, so they'll be deported if caught, is that economists find that they're actually a net benefit to the economy. And also you have to consider our transfer system in the US. We traditionally think that it's transferring money from the rich to the poor, but actually most of our transfer systems are actually from the young to the old. And if you look at the demographics of the immigrants, actually the vast majority of them are young people. And in fact, they may be one of the only ways we can keep Social Security and Medicare solvent is by them coming here and paying into the system. And when you actually look at how much they're paying into the system compared to what they're taking out, they're actually paying in far more than they're taking out.
Yeah, when you think about it, a lot of immigrants, if I'm thinking through who's coming, it's people who are fairly young and into their middle-age years where they're generally not relying on a lot of health care, like us. You know, we pay insurance as a just in case, but we don't have to go to the doctor real often. And I've been told that often when they go to the doctor, they just pay cash and don't want to run the risk of having the records reported and potentially getting flagged for immigration. So that seems to jive with what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. They don't sneak across the desert, they don't sneak across the water in order to get into the U.S. just to live off the system. They're here to work, and if they can, they will establish themselves and become citizens if that process is open for them.
You mentioned that, in fact, they may be the only way we can save Social Security. If you look at demographic trends, we're getting older as a country. We're not raising entitlement ages very quickly, if at all. You know, you still only have to be 62 or 65 to start drawing Social Security, 65 for Medicare. So indeed, they may relieve the strain on that a little bit. People recently, including Alan Greenspan, Charles Schumer in New York, have been saying not only could they relieve the burden of some of our entitlement programs, but they could really help with the housing market problem. We have a backlog of housing that's almost a year in length. If people just kept buying houses at the rate that they currently are, it would take 12 months to clear out. Greenspan said there's an easy solution to this, just to let a lot more people come. Schumer has said if people come and buy a $500,000 house or more, I believe that's what he's saying, then they can have a path towards citizenship. Are those things that are fairly consistent with what you're saying, like open immigration efforts at least? I mean, they're gradual, but are they in the right direction, would you say? Yeah,
absolutely. As we've discussed previously, government created this boom in housing through policies that encourage this excess supply of housing. One of the only ways we can fix that is through this market mechanism of allowing immigrants into the U.S. and they will buy up that extra stock of housing and really help us get over this recession.
So we've talked about the labor market issues, the also kind of the welfare issues of immigrants. There's another area that people seem really uncomfortable with when you talk about immigration, and that's the cultural issues. Immigrants are different than us. Immigrants don't speak the same language as us, and we may have to change the way that we teach students if we become overwhelmed with immigrants. We may have to change our road signs. There may be restaurants that are in another language that we can't understand even what they're serving. These cultural issues may be significant. Are they something that we should be worried about and maybe have at least some controls on who comes as a result of cultural concerns?
Well, as far as language, they're actually far overblown. Studies on Mexican immigrants actually show that 90% of second-generation Mexican immigrants speak English.
Okay.
And actually, if you're really concerned about integrating Spanish speakers with American English speakers in the classroom, that's more of an indictment of the uniformity of the public education system rather than indictment of immigrants. If we had competitive competition in the education market, schools would compete and try to find different ways to integrate those cultures and those languages into the classroom or cater to specific cultures and languages. And also on the cultural front, if I asked anyone in America, what are the greatest cultural cities in the U.S., what are they going to be? It's going to be New York City, Miami, Los Angeles, probably. And those also, all those cities have three things in common. They're places that are most populated by immigrants in the U.S. So what we call the most distinctive thing about American culture, the most distinctive American places, are actually created by jousting with other cultures. Culture isn't a static thing. It's a dynamic thing that needs constant rejuvenation, and it needs to be renewed by being exposed to new cultures. The only way you can really appreciate the important fundamental things in your culture is by being exposed to other cultures and integrating, adopting the best practices in their cultures and combining yours and changing yours. So people think culture is static, but really it's a dynamic, changing thing. If you look at the cultures that we really value today, if you look back just a few generations ago, they were completely different than they are now. The reason we value them is because they have grown and they are dynamic.
Darrick, you wanted to say something, and let me just toss this cultural question to you a little bit. You know some of these people firsthand. You worry about how they're doing. Will they show up for work the next day? You know when they're sick. Can you comment at all on the culture of a lot of the people that you've employed?
The culture part of it, I mean, it's like anything else. You just got to get used to it. Once you get used to it, it's second nature.
Yeah.
I mean, you talk to them, they understand you. The culture difference is not that much. It's not that different, actually. I mean, they eat the same food as you and I do. They like the same things as you and I do. There's just not that much difference to them. They're just people.
Yeah.
And adding on to that, one of the important things to remember is one of the most distinctive things about American culture is the ability for someone to come here with nothing, no titles, no family name, and to work hard and make it. And I think that's the essence of American culture more than anything. So if that's what we want to encourage, immigrants are exhibiting it far more than a lot of Native Americans are exhibiting it.
We've talked a fair amount about personal culture, but I wonder, is it different if we're thinking about voting and the possibility of immigrants assimilating to a point where they get citizenship and then start reflecting their values in the voting booth? Could that lead to Alabama becoming very different than what it is? Like Alabama becoming like Mexico City over time, or Alabama becoming like Greece if we had a lot of Greek citizens come. We only have, 4.5 million people in the state. If you allowed in hundreds of thousands of immigrants per year and gave them a path towards citizenship, which I would assume you'd be in favor of, they could also vote. And they may start voting for things that just totally erode what it means to be an Alabamian. Is this something that I should be concerned about, or is it? I know it's a criticism that's raised against open immigration people. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I find that a peculiar argument as well, because what we're saying is that we value liberty, and if we open our borders to immigrants coming in, then maybe they won't value liberty as much as us. And in order to preserve liberty, we need to create another government program, another enforcement mechanism to keep people out. Right. And throughout America was founded on immigration and free trade. And we're putting up barriers that in order to preserve liberty, that seems a little bit odd. But if you actually look at immigrants that come over, a lot of times they appreciate freedoms a lot more than Native Americans do, because they've lived under repressive, corrupt regimes around the world. And they're coming here for the chance to actually be able to work hard and earn keep what they earn.
even though there are these arguments that make sense in favor of open immigration, we're now living with it. The bill has been passed. The higher courts, the Supreme Court of Alabama, federal courts have ruled that it mostly can remain intact with a few things that have to be trimmed around the edges. The governor has said he doesn't want to be remembered for just immigration. He wants to be remembered for his entire record and doesn't want this to be a big blemish on the state. Being a farmer, are there obvious things that could be done to relieve your burden? I'll ask that of you, Darrick. And Dan, what would you do from a policy standpoint to deal with the fact that now we have this bill that seems like it's going to remain, to at least, free things up, to allow Darrick to have workers in his field, to not have it be so burdensome? Do you have any ideas about what you'd like to see?
Not so, I mean, personally I haven't read the whole law all the way through, but don't be so strict on them. I mean, they're just trying to make a living as well. I mean, we try to hire, like I said before, we try to hire all legal immigrants that have green cards. I mean, there may be one or two that slips in between our fingers that we don't catch, but overall, it's like y'all have been saying. They value freedom as much as we do, maybe even more. I mean, I don't think they're going to corrupt or damage or anything to that point of our system or our ways of living. If anything, they're going to enhance it and give something that we don't have already from their own culture. I mean, I like going to Mexican restaurants as much as anybody else. I mean, just think about that and get a real authentic Mexican restaurant down the road. I mean, you might see something on the menu you've never seen before. So I think it's a good thing myself. I mean, let them come, let them work, let them be legal and in the system, and don't shorthand them.
Anything you'd add to that in terms of policy steps that can be taken to just make this law less burdensome now that it's here and with us?
Yeah, absolutely. And what people are finding around the state of Alabama and in Georgia, where they've also passed a similar law, is that immigration is on net a benefit for consumers because of lower prices, workers because immigrants complement the labor force, and for immigrants themselves in developing nations around the world. When people flee developing nations that are corrupt and dictatorial, they come here to the U.S. Well, their developing nations are forced to increase and improve their policies in order to keep their residents there. So it's a net benefit across the board to everyone. And I think it's going to be something like what would be the best thing about this law now that's on the books, short of repealing it, is that it's kind of like the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit on 231. It's just impractical to enforce people driving over 5 miles, 10 miles over the speed limit. It's just it's too much economic. There's too many resources being devoted to non-practical things that actually cause economic harm. And I think the best thing to do is kind of take a really relaxed approach to enforcing the laws, especially enforcing the laws when people are just trying to work. They're coming here, they're honest people coming here to labor freely, and just allow that process to work and let them keep what they earn, and don't enforce the law strict to the letter T.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the enforcement costs related to this, and just how impractical it is to do this, to have every business doing it, to have every government agency doing it. And right after the bill was passed, we saw some evidence of this, the Department of Motor Vehicles in larger cities having 6-8 hour all-day lines, essentially, not because they're slow and inefficient, which they usually are, but because they were adding these additional burdens on to everyone who was trying to get a driver's license. We're also seeing some consequences of people being profiled, and a number of companies who have said, if you stick with this and enforce it to the letter of the law, we may have to think about leaving. And I would assume not only are some going to think about leaving the state, there have to be a lot who are saying, we're not going to even entertain the idea of going to Alabama. That just seems crazy.
In fact, they may avoid Alabama altogether. If they're going to go down to Florida, they're going to avoid Alabama, come up from Florida, avoid Alabama. And that's just not illegal immigrants. Legal immigrants are also disgusted by this law and what is the profiling that is creating, and they're avoiding the state as well. And you also have to look at things like there's a recent string of tornadoes in Alabama, and there's reconstruction efforts going on, and the fact that immigrants aren't up there, that's a huge cost of this immigration law, is that it's going to slow down construction in these areas. Once construction is for reconstruction of those areas, building fast is very important to coordinating recovery.
Yeah, what a shame not to let anyone who can get to Tuscaloosa get up there and into the Birmingham area to build as well. You know, just kind of a wrap-up question for you guys. Are you optimistic that, in fact, we're going to head in this direction? Is the best case probably that it's like a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit, we just ignore it? Or, you know, do you feel as though some steps will be taken because farmers are so outraged, economists are so outraged? I know that the church, a lot of church members are really offended by it as well. So you have these groups who are so disgusted with what's actually been done that there might be some momentum for change. Do you think actual meaningful policy change will come, or are we just going to say this is a bad law that nobody pays attention to? Do you have can you look into your crystal balls and give me any sense of where things are headed?
Not really.
No.
I mean, I hope it for a good change, but an overall change, it's going to be far in the future.
Well, I think it's part of as a faculty member in the Manuel Johnson Center, I think it's part of our mission to try to get these ideas out that actually it is causing economic harm, and it is going to hurt the state of Alabama, and I think the harm is going to add up, and people are backpedaling like, ooh, maybe they'll make marginal adjustments to the law, make it more relaxed, or more lax. Hopefully we can see some change. I'd prefer to see the law, as I mentioned, repealed. And hopefully our politicians can step up and actually admit that they did something wrong and admit that immigration is on net a good thing.
Guys, I want to thank you both for being with me. This is a busy time of year, and wish you the happiest of holidays as well. It was not fun putting on the skeptic hat tonight, but I did the best I could at asking you the tough questions. And viewers, I thank you all for tuning in tonight. We're going to have another show next week on Alabama's pension system, some of the challenges that we face with keeping the pension system fully funded, and the future of the retirement system of Alabama. Thank you and good night.